Hiking is absolutely invigorating, except when the trail you choose is filled with legendary monsters, giant boulders, or deadly optical illusions. A ton of stories have taken shape along the shores of Washington State's Lake Crescent over the centuries. There have been numerous sightings of the ghostly form of a woman drifting across the surface of the lake, and she might not just be a tall tale. The lake was the site of a gruesome murder, and the ghostly lady is thought to be the victim's restless spirit. It all started in 1936 when a barmaid named Hallie married a man named Monty Illingworth. Alas, their relationship was abusive from the start, and in less than a year, Hallie disappeared amidst rumors that she'd run off with a sailor. Monty eventually moved away, and then in 1940, Hallie's perfectly preserved remains floated to the surface of the lake. Her body had undergone a process called saponification, which turned her flesh into something like soap and earned her the nickname the Ivory Soap Corpse. The process also preserved signs that she'd been strangled before being dumped into the lake. It all led to an investigation that pointed right to her husband, who was arrested. He was paroled after a few years, and some hikers who visit the lake claim that Hallie is still there. When Australian serial killer Ivan Milat died in 2019, the sad truth was that he would likely never concretely be tied to the victims he was only suspected of murdering. Back in 1996, he was convicted of killing 7 hikers between the ages of 19 and 22, though it's suspected that his true victim total was closer to 20. The murders that Milat was convicted of started in 1989 with the disappearance of Deborah Everest and James Gibson. Other victims disappeared while backpacking across Australia, and the deaths continued for 4 years before a connection was made. When Everest and Gibson's bodies were finally found in the Belanglo State Forest in 1993, the handful of suspects got smaller. Milat's trial took 18 weeks, and he was given 7 consecutive life sentences. Up until his death, possible victims' families still continued to hold out hope that he would confess to more murders. Alas, he did not. And there's also a terrifying footnote to the story. In 2010, Milat's great-nephew Matthew Milat headed into the Belanglo State Forest with a friend and then murdered him. He even reportedly said, "You know me, you know my family, you know the last name Milat. I did what they do."
In the column of history marked Most Evil Australians, the name Ivan Robert Marco Milat features prominently.
Between 1979 and 1981, trails near San Francisco were posted with signs warning people, especially women, not to hike alone. That's because there was a serial killer stalking the area. By the time that David Carpenter was arrested, it is believed that he killed at least 10 people. Etta Kane was the first of Carpenter's suspected victims. Just a few months after her death in August 1979, a group of golfers ignored the screams that they heard coming from a trail in Golden Gate National Recreation Area. Mary Frances Bennett had been out jogging near Land's End when she was stabbed 25 times. Her body was found by hikers who followed a trail of blood to the shallow grave where she'd been dumped. It wasn't until May of 1981 that police arrested Carpenter. He was already on the police's radar, as Kane's murder happened just 3 months after Carpenter was released to a halfway house after serving 2.5 years of a 7-year sentence for kidnapping, sexual assault, and robbery. He'd also previously served a 9-year sentence for attacking a woman with a hammer. The Smoky Mountains of North Carolina is one of the eeriest places to hike in the United States, especially along Norton Creek Trail. According to Cherokee legend, the being known as Spearfinger was capable of taking a wide variety of forms, but her true one was an elderly ogress with skin that was so hard it was impenetrable. True to her name, she had one extra long finger that she could use as a spear. Spearfinger's favorite targets were children on the trails, but she preyed on anyone and everyone. Legend has it that she could kill her victims quickly with one fatal stab or slowly with a deep penetrating wound that caused no pain, letting her victims waste away after she stole their livers. Until, that is, the locals had had enough. As the story goes, after suffering countless losses to Spearfinger, a group of warriors dug a pit across one of the trails that she frequented. Luring her in with a campfire, they were finally able to kill her. A chickadee landed on her hand and showed the warriors where to aim their arrows. So they fired, and the witch was no more.
And that's where her heart was.
There have been multiple documented cases of people finding dead bodies during otherwise peaceful nature walks. In 2019, hikers found human remains on a California mountain, and it was soon determined that they were part of the body of a man named Gichi Matsumura. In 1945, Matsumura had left a Japanese-American internment camp to go on a hike. He planned to stop and paint, but was caught in a freak storm and killed. The odd footnote is that he'd been buried on the mountaintop due to rough terrain, making it hard to move the body. On the other side of the Atlantic, in April 2020, 2 people were hiking along the Ward River in Dublin, Ireland, where they discovered bones and called authorities. It was determined that the skeleton dated back to the 15th century. And in more tragic examples, hikers sometimes set out specifically to find bodies. In August 2021, the BBC reported that an Englishman named Daniel Colgate had discovered the remains of his girlfriend, Esther Dingley. She disappeared back in November 2020 while hiking alone in the Pyrenees. It wasn't until April that the weather cleared enough for Colgate to begin his search for her. After covering hundreds of miles on foot, he eventually discovered her body. The Brocken is the highest peak in Germany's Harz Mountains, and a ton of tales have been told about the witches, goblins, and ogres that supposedly live among its trees. But there's one terror there that's absolutely real, and it's known as the Brocken Spectre. Reported sightings of the Spectre go back to at least 1780, although it's been around for a lot longer than that. It's an optical illusion created when the right combination of sun and fog results in a person's shadow being projected onto a cloud and ringed by a surreal rainbow-colored aura. It's also been observed in other locations like the Burley Moor in England. It's not so much a human shadow as it's an elongated, long-limbed form with a tiny head. Even if you know the science behind it, it's still plenty terrifying. According to German stories, when one man was out hiking on a foggy early morning and he saw the specter looming down the path ahead of him, he leapt off the mountain to his death rather than face the eerie shade. In the early days of 1959, the remains of 9 hikers were discovered on the Soviet Union's ominously named Dead Mountain. They'd cut their way out of their tent from the inside, leaving behind neatly folded clothes and provisions. When they were found, most of the bodies were half-dressed and had broken bones, while some were missing eyes, and one woman was missing her tongue. The official cause of death was hypothermia, and the so-called Dyatlov Pass incident became the stuff of conspiracy theories and tall tales, as well as a 2013 horror film called Devil's Pass.
It's a test, you know? Man against the elements.
In 2019, Russian authorities were reopening the case, and investigators looked at 75 theories that had sprung up around the incident. In 2021, researchers from the Snow and Avalanche Simulation Laboratory in Switzerland published results of a study. They explained that the tent was pitched in a hollow that hikers had carved into the mountain. It's posited that fresh snowfall and winds triggered a slab avalanche that sent the 9 scrambling from their shelter and into the freezing cold. However, it's unlikely we'll ever know for sure exactly what happened. The Appalachian Trail goes through 14 states from Maine to Georgia and covers nearly 2,200 miles. Those who visit Bluff Mountain in North Carolina while hiking the trail are supposedly kept awake at night by the spirit of a little boy whose body was discovered there in 1891. This was the body of little Ottie Cline Powell. Hikers have reported a number of odd occurrences happening around the Punch Bowl mountain shelter, including one who swore that he woke up in the middle of the night to see the little boy standing in the corner. In the morning, all the hikers' clothes had been neatly folded and a pile of dried chestnuts had been set out for him. Others have reported being awakened by someone poking them and seeing a little boy running just ahead of them out of sight. And they all supposedly believed that it was little Ottie Cline Powell. Powell was just about to turn 5 years old when his teacher sent him and a few other students out to gather firewood on a cold November day. Alas, he never returned. Search parties scoured the mountain, but it wasn't until the following April that a group of hunters found his remains. He was buried on his parents' property. The family moved away, but those who stayed remembered him with a memorial built where he died. In May 2019, a man named James Jordan stabbed and killed Oklahoma resident Ronald Sanchez in Virginia. That made him the 10th person to be murdered along the Appalachian Trail in the 45 years that the Appalachian Trail Conservancy had been keeping track. Hikers had reportedly already been spreading warnings to each other about Jordan, who had been harassing people along the way. He pulled a knife and an axe on hikers in Tennessee, and in Virginia, he told 4 hikers that he was going to burn them alive in their tents. He pulled a knife on them as well, when they managed to escape. A woman who was camping in the same area as Sanchez was stabbed by Jordan, but she also escaped and walked 6 miles to get help. Jordan was arrested and charged with murder, but was ultimately found not guilty by reason of insanity.
And now hikers say the trail is safe again.
The Romanian region of Transylvania is probably best known for Dracula, but the most terrifying place there might actually be the forest called Hoia Baciu. Few know the area better than local guide Alex Sortican, and even he won't spend the night there, not after one visit in which he was kept awake by the sound of hoofbeats outside of his tent. The forest was named after a shepherd who disappeared there along with his flock of 200 sheep, and there are so many stories of the mysterious disappearances that it's known as the Bermuda Triangle of Romania. An abnormally high number of hikers have described being overwhelmed with feelings of nausea and anxiety while in the forest, and those with electronic devices that still work there have captured eerie photos. Some have included shadowy figures and hovering lights, and there's a man in traditional Romanian dress that shows up a lot as well. Then there's the area known as the clearing, where none of the forest's thick trees will grow. The trees on the outskirts of the clearing are misshapen and twisted, and no scientific explanation has been found for this, nor for the empty space. But if you're looking for a supernatural reason, Sortican offers something different by starting his tours with a philosophical warning. The forest is only haunted if you bring your own ghosts. Aron Ralston's harrowing story was shared worldwide with the release of the Oscar-nominated 2010 film 127 Hours, in which he was played by James Franco. Back in 2003, Ralston headed out for what he thought was going to be an 8-hour hike, covering about 13 miles through Utah's Blue John Canyon. But then he accidentally knocked loose an 800-pound boulder and ended up with his hand pinned beneath it. The supplies that he had on hand were the bare minimum that he needed to survive. Before he headed out on his hike, Ralston had made a huge error. He didn't tell anyone where he was going. Once he was pinned down, he was only too aware of this, and thus he saw only one solution to his situation. He had to amputate his own arm. The skin was just the beginning, as he also had to break through his bones by throwing himself against the rock and snapping off the part of his arm that he couldn't cut through. The whole process of removing his arm took about an hour, and by that time, Ralston had already been trapped beneath the boulder for 5 days. After tying a tourniquet, he scaled a 65-foot cliff and started what he knew would be a 10-hour hike to safety. He was eventually aided by a group of hikers until they were found by a search and rescue helicopter. Ralston has since gone back to the spot where he was trapped and has admitted, "I touch it and go back to that place, remembering when I thought about what's important in life."
When something happens, it's a trauma, but we decide whether it's going to be a tragedy or a triumph.
In 2006, Brandon Day and Gina Allen told D Magazine the harrowing story of their 5th date. Their goal was to take a tram to the top of Mount San Jacinto in California and hit the bar there. But after an impromptu snowball fight got them turned around, they went from being surrounded by other people to trying to determine which direction the voices were coming from to completely and hopelessly lost. With no supplies or gear, Brandon and Gina found themselves facing nights during which the temperatures dipped to near freezing. Friday quickly turned into Monday. That's when they came across a campsite where they found personal effects, including a driver's license belonging to a man named John Donovan, along with a journal outlining his last wishes. In the journal, Donovan wrote that he was trapped in a gorge, and Brandon and Gina quickly realized that they were now trapped between the mountain and a 300-foot waterfall. Fortunately for them, though, they had Donovan's gear, which included matches that they used to start a fire. This ultimately attracted the attention of one of the helicopters that was out looking for them. After being rescued, they recounted the story of the campsite, and a team returned to recover Donovan's body. As he requested in his journal, he was buried in a military cemetery in Virginia. In 1991, German couple Erika and Helmut Simon were on holiday in the mountains on the border between Italy and Austria. When they headed out for a hike on September 19th, they probably never expected to find a body, let alone the 5,300-year-old remains of a murder victim. Ötzi the Iceman was recovered 4 days after he was first spotted by the unsuspecting hikers, and his murder investigation was officially reopened by Italian authorities in 2017. It reportedly took a decade before researchers found the arrowhead that killed him. As luck would have it, it was still in his back. When Munich's Detective Chief Inspector Alex Horn took a look at the evidence, he concluded that Ottie had been caught unaware when he was shot from a distance of at least 100 feet. As he was found alongside his weapons and had defensive wounds on his hands, it led Horn to speculate that he'd fought his killer earlier and then was ambushed. Even more surprising were findings published in 2019. A study of the mosses and pollens found around Ottie and in his digestive tract showed that he'd done quite a bit of hiking himself in the days leading up to his death. Although he was discovered at a site 10,530 feet above sea level, he'd ingested pollen from 8,200 feet about 33 hours prior. About 10 hours before he died, he was at around 4,000 feet, meaning his last hours were likely spent in a frantic climb.
He is the Iceman.
The Grand Canyon is one of the most breathtaking wonders in the United States, and there are dozens of trails that hikers can traverse when they visit. But there's only one where they've reportedly encountered the Wailing Woman. She's always reported to be wearing a white dress decorated with blue flowers, as well as a scarf covering her hair. So many people have supposedly seen her that it's gotten to the point where even skeptics should wonder if there's something legitimate happening here. The Wailing Woman is said to be the spirit of a young lady who moved to the area in the late 1920s. Along with her husband and their young son, she lived at the newly built Grand Canyon Lodge until tragedy tore them apart. Father and son were out hiking when a storm swept through, and both were killed in a fall from Transect Trail. Unable to come to terms with their tragic deaths, the woman took her own life, and now her spirit continues to wander the trail where she once searched in vain for her beloved husband and son. The lodge where the woman died burned in 1932, and witnesses claim to have seen her walking among the flames. One door in the rebuilt lodge even supposedly slams shut every time it's left open. In 2019, Backpacker magazine published the story of Kira Moon. She was hiking the Pacific Crest Trail when she met former Navy SEAL James William Parrillo, and the two started walking together. But it wasn't long before things took a dark turn. When Moon posted a picture of the two of them on her social media, she claimed that Parrillo flew into a rage. It eventually emerged that he wasn't a Navy SEAL at all. Instead, he was a drifter with a slew of aliases and just as many women who had accused him of kidnapping and sexual assault. According to Moon, Parrillo forced her to hike alongside him for 5 months. She claimed that beatings and assaults were frequent, and her story was later supported by x-rays that showed her ribs had been broken. Back home, suspicions mounted as Moon and Parrillo continued their hike. When her family started digging, they found Parrillo had once been featured on the show Unsolved Mysteries and was connected to a list of offenses that included things like threatening the president. Months went by before Moon saw a chance to escape by fleeing into an urgent care facility and calling police. Homeless and struggling with PTSD, she died in a trailer fire in 2019. Parrillo was never charged with her kidnapping, though there are numerous Reddit threads dedicated to hikers who identify him and his location to warn those nearby.
First, he starts off by pouring on the charm, but before too long, the mask is going to come off.
In February 2023, Parrillo was arrested in New Jersey and charged with kidnapping after allegedly holding a woman hostage for nearly a year. There's a historic hiking trail where visitors have reported hearing something eerily specific, voices echoing over the gently sloping hills, singing a song that sounds like a Christmas carol. And historians say that might not be a coincidence. Decades ago, this site was where the Irish Brigade faced down advancing Confederate soldiers and sang their Gaelic battle cry with a Christmas-like melody. Antietam National Battlefield in Maryland has been called one of the most haunted hiking spots in the United States, and considering what's happened there, it's easy to see why. Civil War buffs will surely recognize the name of the location as the bloodiest day in American history. That was September 17, 1862, with estimates suggesting that one man died every 2 seconds over a period of 12 hours. It's also the location of a dirt road once used mainly by local farmers. The Sunken Road was renamed Bloody Lane after about 5,500 men fell there. Today, they are still supposedly seen and heard by those who walked the route. The U.S. Department of Transportation has actually shared some of the stories told around the area. They say that it doesn't matter how many people are hiking the trail, it'll still remain eerily quiet as far as modern sounds go. Hikers have reported hearing the sounds of battle and smelling the scent of gunpowder filling the air. They also claim to believe that they're sharing the trail with reenactors, that is, until the men vanish. Sometimes when a hiker goes missing, the true cause is much more sinister than a bad sense of direction. In 2007, authorities were alerted about the disappearances of John and Irene Bryant in the forests of North Carolina. Irene's remains were discovered first, and it was reportedly believed that she'd been murdered on October 21st. Then, another woman named Meredith Emerson vanished. She'd been hiking in the woods in northern Georgia with her dog when she disappeared. Police arrested the last man seen with her, who had also reportedly tried to use her bank card. That man was Gary Hilton, who ultimately agreed to a guilty plea and agreed to reveal the location of Emerson's remains in exchange for immunity from the death penalty. He was sentenced to life in prison, but he also received the death penalty for the murder of a nurse named Cheryl Hodges Dunlop. Emerson's last few days were detailed by law enforcement after Hilton's confession. Even after fighting back and initially escaping, he subdued her and held her for 4 days. Hilton claimed that he'd released her dog because he couldn't bring himself to kill the animal, and when he was asked about Emerson, he eerily replied, "It was hard. You gotta remember, we had spent several good days together."
Well, here is Gary Hilton's latest mugshot, and he has several of these by now.
Anyone brave enough to hike out to North Carolina's Roan Mountain when the wind is blowing could be treated to a potentially dangerous otherworldly concert. According to local author and historian Jennifer Bauer, people have been hearing the so-called ghost choir since at least the 19th century, though not everyone has heard the exact same thing. Accounts compiled by Bauer include some seriously terrifying tales. Some people have reported hearing what sounds like a choir of angels, while others claim that they were fairies. Still others describe it as something much more sinister, the howling of demons and the sounds of souls being tortured drifting up from the bowels of hell itself. That's the story told by one man who found himself forced to seek shelter in a cave during a storm. He emerged with hair turned white from fear. He claimed that he'd spent a terrifying night as a witness to visions of damnation tormented by demons that ripped at his clothes, the same demons who shrieked in winds. More scientific observations were recorded by Henry E. Colton, a geologist who visited the site in 1878. He described it as the humming of 1,000 bees, which still sounds rather terrifying. He hypothesized that it had something to do with the electrical currents running through the area.
But that was the scientific approach to finding out why so many people were frightened.
Aokigahara is a forest about an hour-and-a-half drive from Tokyo. It's a beautiful place that attracts hikers from all over the world, but it also has a dark nickname, the Suicide Forest. Hikers looking to explore the area can hire guides. One of those guides reportedly found 36 bodies in a span of just 37 days. Aokigahara is such a popular destination for people trying to take their own lives that the trails are filled with signs reminding people the life you were given from your parents is precious. In 2010, authorities released statistics revealing that 247 people attempted to take their own life that year, and that there were 54 confirmed deaths. The forest's connection to suicide goes back to ancient folklore, as it said that families would leave elderly relatives there to die in a practice called ubaste. Aokigahara also serves as the setting for the 2016 supernatural horror film, Forest. If you or anyone you know is having suicidal thoughts, please call the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline at 1-800-273-TALK, 8255.